So I thought a good way to demonstrate Chapter 3 was to actually do a little mini case. So I used Elms College to actually come up with an example. So you can see in this example, Elms College has about approximately 1,200 undergraduate and graduate student population. And below right here, you'll see that we've formatted this in a contribution formatted statement. That just means that we start with revenues, take out all variable expenses, and come down to contribution margin. Now in Chapter 3 in the book, there was a lot of formulas. I would say the one formula that you need to know, and the only formula that you really need to know to make the break-evens work, is simply to take the fixed costs and divide them by the unit contribution margin. And that'll give you unit break-even. So break-even in units equals fixed costs divided by unit contribution margin. And unit contribution margin we know is going to be taking our unit revenues minus our unit variable expenses. So I'm going to start with this. I'm going to given this scenario right here, let's go through the calculations. So I'm first going to calculate a per unit information. So again, we have 1,200 students. So if I was going to do that, I'm going to take our revenue divided by the 1,200, and I'm going to make this an absolute value. There we go. Then I am going to take that and do the same thing for our variable. So instead of, I'm just going to copy that down. And then we have this subtract the variable expenses equal our unit contribution margin. So this right here is our unit contribution margin. There we go. Now from that, I am going to look what would happen if we added that advertising. So with advertising, which it says down here that we're considering an advertising campaign. And if we do this campaign, we would actually attract more students. The advertising campaign costs $1 million. So that $1 million is going to be included now in my fixed expenses. Whether I get students or I don't, I have to pay it. So it is now a fixed expense. And as a result of doing this, it's expected that our population will grow 20%. And it has no effect on the variable per student. So let's calculate what 20% would be. So we're going to take this times 1.2, gives us a new number of students, which would be added. So we're going to go in and say that we would now have 1,440 for students. Again, that was a 20% increase. So I multiplied the original number of 1,200 students times 1.2, which will calculate the 20% increase. All right, so let's go down and recalculate this then. None of this changes, right? We still have a revenue per student, and we still have variable costs remain equal, so the unit contribution margin, even with this new advertising expense, remains same. Because again, we're not charging each student more, we're simply getting more students. So from a variable perspective, that number will change in total, but it will not change on a per unit basis. Nowhere in here does it say we're increasing the fee we charge, so the revenue per student doesn't change in per student. It'll change in a total basis, right? So if we were looking at it, we can do that in a second, but let's continue on with this. Our fixed costs, we said we're going to change, where we're going to start with the $5.5 million, and we're going to add $1 million. So I've added $1 million. So when I come down now and do my unit break even, my break-evens will look a little bit different. So let's say if I took my fixed costs and I divide by my unit contribution margin, I get a break-even of 1,300 students. If I do it over here, again, I take my fixed costs and divide by my unit contribution margin, I get a unit break-even in units, which is students. So you can see that if I add that $1 million in fixed expense, I need 200 more students in order to make up for that difference. Fixed expenses greatly impact my my contribution margin would stay the same, but my fixed expenses going up will actually increase the number of students that I need to break even. So the first question that we're asked here is, what's the effect on the college's annual income? All right, so we can take a look at this. We will then do that over here. So let's annualize this. So if we had, again, 30,000 per student, I now have, let me make this an absolute value. There we go. And now we should be able to copy this down. Let's just put these formulas in. We now have this much, and if I take our contribution margin minus our variable, we'll end up with 7. So let me just format this up a little bit here. The formatting drives me nuts. So I'm going to quickly format this. And let's see. I do not see. Well, let me do it this way. I'm going to take the formats over here that I like. I'm going to copy those, and I'm going to paste them over here with a paste special. And I'm going to do the formats only. There we go. All right. So to answer the first question, we have here that the annual effect on the colleges would be 200, right? We would take the 700 that we just recalculated minus the baseline, which was 200. So we have a $200,000 increase as a result of spending that $1 million in advertising. We said that the break-even would also increase. We would have to have 200 more students in order to make no money on that investment, right, in order to break even. So from that standpoint, any other qualitative or quantitative considerations that need to be understood in this? Well, here at Elms, we actually may not be able to house 200 more students. So in order to do this, this would assume that our structure could actually handle an increase in 200 residential students, since they would be international students. We don't have dorm space to do that right now. So that would be a consideration that administration would have to really think about. In addition to that, we would probably have to hire some support folks in order for us to handle 200 new international global students. I think we would actually have to increase our support structure to handle things like transition from their culture and maybe some language and other types of services that we would have to offer for international students to be successful at that level compared to the level that we have in our population currently. So there's many things to consider. Is this a one-time increase? Is the increase really even true? Will we really get that 20%? Right now we're making a prediction. We have to spend the money. The fixed costs have to be incurred up front in order to potentially attract more people. Based on my experience, I think that the marketing efforts sometimes take a little bit longer, so maybe it takes more than a year to actually recoup that $1 million investment, and that might be something that we need to consider. Cash flow. Do we have $1 million that we want to put into advertising? so that we could potentially increase our student population to 100. This should give you a good idea. So this actually took you through break-even analysis and how what if could be looked at in Chapter 3 using break-even. Again, Chapter 3 has quite a bit of formulas. Use this one. You'll never go wrong. Even if you wanted to get break-even dollars at this point, all you have to do, you know what it cost, the dollars were for one, just multiply it by your break-even number. So if you were getting break-even in dollars, right, we could easily take the number of break-even students and multiply it by the dollars per student, right? That's how much we get per student. So there's lots of ways to do this. As you saw in the book, I thought by demonstrating one way and doing it one way, you'd never have to remember all those formulas that you had read about in Chapter 3. Now what I'd like you to do is I've posted 2 different mini cases for you to take a look at. Take a look at them, and then I'll post the answers as well. Have a great week.